Hey folks, and welcome to the Daily Ratings Podcast. It's a show where each week we'll sit down with Vincent Daly to get his thoughts on the latest movies he's been watching, both older films and new releases. And don't worry, there's no spoilers. Vince will give a brief review of the movie, share some thoughts, and of course, then rate the film. The Daily Ratings are always fair, honest, and most importantly, they're consistent. On today's show, Vince will be rating and reviewing American Graffiti, directed by George Lucas, The Warriors by Walter Hill, Lamb by Valdemar Johansson, and newly released Umma by Iris K. Shim, and Turning Red, directed by Do Mi Shi. So stay tuned and enjoy the show. Mr. Vincent Daly, how we doing, buddy?
Tommy boy, how's it going?
It's going all right. It's going all right. How was your week of movies, man?
Week was good. I watched a wide variety of films. I was happy to dive into a lot of these. American Graffiti, of course, is the only second entry, but the end of the George Lucas project to see some of what his earlier films was. Even some classics like The Warriors kind of came out of the blue, but very happy to watch them.
Yeah, I love that we have two 70s movies here.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's start there. We're going to go back to 1973. This is American Graffiti by George Lucas. And how did it fare, Vin?
So like we covered a couple weeks back, I actually don't know how many weeks back we covered THX 1138, but that was Lucas's...
About a month ago or something like that, yeah.
Yeah, that was Lucas's first film. This is a follow-up to that film with a total shift in genre. What is odd about it is his last film before he directs anything other than Star Wars.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
He's Team Star Wars forevermore. It's interesting because this was an easy film study for me. Not only that, I mean, I am a huge Star Wars fan and nerd to try to spot trends and directing habits and writing habits in the screenplays of these films. It was very interesting because it was easy to do. We're really just looking at two movies before the huge amount of sci-fi, and with George Lucas being such a iconic director, a fan or not of him, there is a lot to potentially spot. This is money backed by Francis Ford Coppola himself and a handful of Oscar nominations. American Graffiti is a story about small-town blues in the early 60s. The whole film is over the course of a single night. It's focusing around a group of 3 to 4 friends. Some are going to college the next day. The others are staying in the town. And we kind of follow them throughout the course of the night in developing on those feelings of small-town blues and maybe expectations and overall kind of a very coming-of-age story. Straight up, though, Tom, with this being a coming-of-age comedy, it kind of feels like Superbad, or rather Superbad feels like it, especially with how we have a group of friends going in all different directions over the course of one night. It really surprised me. I mean, I hate to give maybe something so simple as a comparison of that, but no joke.
It had the same vibes.
Absolutely, especially with how the friends split off and get into shenanigans and they cross paths and they're like, "Oh my God, you're here!"
Okay, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's very interesting how it is layered like that, and honestly, I could not shake that feeling throughout the whole thing, especially when it comes to that structure of a party night, one night to remember, I feel like that plays into a lot of coming of age stories. The town that they're in, as far as them being around this one night and just different parts of the town, it's interesting. It feels very 50s, or definitely a 50s love letter. I think this movie is decent. It's, like I said, a very serious love letter to the 50s. This is both in the chromed out hot rod feel of its subject matter, but also in the theme of glory days gone by. This is being set in the early 60s, so the film itself has a look back very fondly on the last decade with nostalgia and a touch of sadness. Our characters are constantly bringing up, this guy was a legendary racer back in the day. Can you believe this gang is still around in the town? They used to be, they represented something so much more. This film, both in its world itself and the kind of the point of the story, is to look back on these golden days, these glory days of the 50s, and definitely tying into the feelings of maybe melancholy with our main characters. They understand inherently that those days have come and gone, and this being made in 1973 as well, the film kind of serves a nostalgic, love-filled look at what has passed, what has been, passed along over the decades gone. Unfortunately, I don't know. This doesn't translate too great to the story because a lot is introduced as far as this sadness that comes with it. The town is a high school kid paradise. These kids run the town during night, whether it's the gas stations, whether they're drag racing in the street, whether they're just driving around to the burger shop or the malt shop or arcade. It's kind of, it made me question, because the film definitely goes into the next morning, like 5 a.m., how the hell are these businesses open? Was that a thing that happened in the 50s? That the kids are out, we got to keep the doors open? I don't know. It made me scratch my head a little bit. But the plot of this party night is the stakes are inconsequential. This sadness that is brought up, especially around the racing subplot. One of our characters is the current hotshot, hot rod, modded vehicle racer of the town. And a plot thread is his feeling of he's a dinosaur. He's the last of his kind. That is explained because of the very real fact that the mortality rate of these hot rod racers, they were all dying out for a reason. They're not around. They're all kids to begin with. Where are these kids now? And that's where the sadness comes into play. I think why it's inconsequential is that the whole movie kind of comes off as meh, because a lot of this is introduced almost to the point that there is a through line at the very end credits that kind of ties this back to what the film was trying to say, but nothing is done with our characters on screen to drive this home. They mention it. Nothing is done in the actual plot events to tie it together of this sadness, this nostalgia. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and basically how you started it too, where it was just like, it seemed inconsequential. It didn't seem like... you didn't get the stakes all that much. How was the depth of the characters? Lacking?
It's a comedy, A lot of the focus for these characters is left on, putting them in funny situations. I think it's really a comedy first for that reason. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think especially when looking at this, looking at who's in the producer of this, looking at that this is George Lucas's Oscar recognition. I think it's 5 nominations for American Graffiti, 5 or 6.
And it's just the fact of, everyone's heard of it. It's nominated for 5 Oscars.
Yeah.
And it's just the fact that it's a movie that everyone knows and at least has heard of, if not seen it.
Exactly.
And we're thinking, certainly you look at the other ratings for this, and it's not matching up for you. And especially because we're watching the here and now. Maybe that has something to do with it, or how the movie aged. But at the same time, it is kind of like an ageless story. Kids are growing up, coming of age film.
Absolutely.
For one wild night, kind of. I don't know. It's just, it's not like...
And there's certainly, it probably hit really well for audience members at that time because this was something that they can look back on, and maybe share a thought of like, oh yeah, I had a friend back then that died in a car crash or something like that. You know what I mean? The mortality of this small town blues, unfortunately, very little is done with it in the follow through. It's referenced, which is maybe some surface level interest and some depth that is actually given to this 50s, early 60s affair, but just. Yeah, it unfortunately it just comes off meh in the end product, and I wasn't too thrilled with it.
So how's it as a comedy?
Comedy worked pretty well. It's very dialogue driven. We have Ron Howard right off the Andy Griffith Show. It's very interesting casting choices. Is it Richard Dreyfuss? I believe, yeah, Dreyfuss, who I know from Jaws, was primarily a TV actor as well. So there's some creative use in the casting as well. If this film is supposed to represent kind of an evolution, a next step, a break of the mold of what we associate with 50s nostalgia, then guess what? Casting actors that any audience member would know from very iconic 50s TV is a pretty interesting choice strategically for the film. As well, comedy-wise, I think it works pretty well, especially Richard Dreyfuss. He gets involved with the Pharaohs, one of the last remaining gangs within the town that almost take themselves comedically way too seriously. and it goes from kind of a high tense scenario to him realizing how silly this relic of a gang existing in almost his adulthood or coming adulthood is, and he's almost just along for the ride to entertain them structurally as well. Not to overcompare to Superbad, but this was McLovin with the cops basically. I apologize, folks, if that's maybe a little bit too simple of a comparison, I could not shake it for the whole film.
That's really funny.
Yeah, and obviously the proper way to refer to that is Superbad is homaging or ripping off.
Just siphoning a little of the magic.
Of American Graffiti, not the other way around. So if anything, the credit goes to American Graffiti as the pioneer there.
Right.
We also have a very early Harrison Ford. Which was great to see. It was great to see him give a damn about acting.
We got 4 years before New Hope came out, correct?
Yes,
73. New Hope was 77.
Absolutely, and I guess I just never fact checked it, but I was always under the impression that Harrison Ford was like some sort of like working professional. I think like a carpenter, or something like that, and he was like picked off set. Looking back at his filmography, that story in Hollywood must have been way earlier than New Hope. I thought that was always on the set of New Hope.
I could have sworn it was New Hope as well. Yeah. Well, that's the way the lore goes, but could it be American Graffiti then?
Possibly, connected to Lucas,
Because I believe it was Lucas that handpicked him.
Yeah.
Or saw something in him or something like that.
He definitely did have an acting career. I mean, a lot of TV appearances once again.
Yeah. I wonder how much of that is real then, just the story in itself.
It made me
Because we've all heard
it.
that.
Exactly. It was almost like unquestionable lore.
Right, he was part of the set design guy.
Yeah. So odd, but a really good inclusion. He actually plays the foil or the antagonist to our main racer, and
young. I mean, this movie's approaching 50 years old next year.
Yeah,
wow. You know what I mean?
That's nuts.
Yeah,
that's nuts. To talk about 70s movies being 50 years old.
It's not that bad. It's very weird.
Yeah. But really enjoyed his inclusion. I would say a pretty big criticism for me is the soundtrack. The music here is extremely heavy-handed. Granted, all of it is tied to a single radio broadcast that plays throughout all the cars of the night.
Kind of cool.
It is cool. It mostly passes the continuity test that I always talk about, and it's definitely creative in its implementation of that one radio broadcast. Wolfman Jack, who is a radio DJ personality, I believe at the time, that is pulled for this movie, is very entertaining. A kind of a larger-than-life character that, you almost wonder, like, why is he dedicated to this small-town radio station? But it's interesting how it plays into. In the audio design as well, let me let me, shine a light on a little bit of a positive here. There are cool ways that this is implemented. Characters will have a delayed audio and echoing audio, sometimes a Doppler effect to cars driving by.
Okay.
So there is a lot of care into the audio design, but I cannot stress enough, it is overwhelming. It is excessive. I don't think there is more than a handful of scenes that go by that a iconic 50s rock and roll track is not playing. I mean, this is like 95% soundtrack is on and blasting over our characters.
It's the blasting over the characters. That's where it would get me.
Yeah.
On in the background, it's just part of it. That's almost like real life, what it would be if you're around this many, if you're around the cars and everything that much and so much is radio based. The blasting, the in your face is what would get annoying.
Yeah,
I got annoyed a little bit with it. I thought Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was a little bit too much music and a little bit too much in your face. Actually, for that reason. But
yeah, and I just can't shake the fact that like if it's being done to cast a setting and cast that nostalgia, I get it by a few choices. Like, I do not need it to play as much as it is.
Yeah.
Let's maybe even put that aside. It's just, I mean, it pushes the boundaries. I mean, this is the most soundtrack I think I've ever seen in a film. I'm really not joking. Like, 95%. There are very few times that there's no soundtrack playing. And even so, you hear the soundtrack playing through cars passing by, which is cool.
It's kind of cool.
Admittedly, but it's just... It's so much. It's just way too much. And like always, folks at home, I stress, there is no judgment to the choices of music itself. It is again, it's how it's done, how it's actually comes off in the film and implementation in the film then. So to wrap up, of course, I want to talk about Lucas Notes, which has been the whole point of watching these films. And, it's not that easy with THX. THX was a sci-fi, and sci-fi to sci-fi is pretty easy to spot some trends, so harder to compare, but we definitely do see Lucas's love of race sequences in this. His love of capturing speed on film, I think that is key for the eventual mind-blowing speed that is in the fighter sequences in 1977, that captured and really blew audiences' minds at the time. In addition as well, a theme of small-town blues. Lucas, while maybe limited in his directing, is very seasoned as a writer, and we see this concept of small-town blues be revisited in the heart of Luke Skywalker in the original Star Wars, and even once again in 1999 for Phantom Menace for Anakin, wanting to leave Tatooine and whatnot. This concept of small town blues is definitely in the DNA of the type of stories that Lucas writes. These characters have something to run away from, and Lucas is meeting that in his later films with adventure. Specifically for American Graffiti, the whole point of the film is the pressure that there may be an adventure just around the corner. You just have to make the jump.
Cool, yeah.
You have to make the jump away from this small town life that may be comfortable, that may be even a paradise for kids, but there's something more, there's something greater to what you leave behind. Overall, I didn't think this movie was bad. There is a lot of care put into the messaging of what the style means, but it is pretty simple and didn't have me too wowed. I enjoyed it certainly, but I think we're going to go ahead and give American Graffiti a 53.
Ooh, only a 53.
Yeah. There's a lot to like about this film, but I think in the end result, what you come away with is just, okay. I really think, especially watching this in modern day, without maybe a deeper connection to the subject matter of what it's trying to get across with these characters, it's a little meh, unfortunately.
And 53 represents meh pretty good, I would say.
Yeah. But definitely not bad in any regard.
Yeah, for sure.
I can't stress enough that there are things to like here. There are just things that I think have been done better in the meantime, and definitely could be improved upon in later entries, especially when they dedicate more to the comedy of it and the script writing of what even the small town blues means.
Okay, very cool. All right, so 53, folks, if anyone wants to check out American Graffiti, we're going to jump 6 years in advance here. We're in 1979, and this is The Warriors.
Yes. Okay.
What do we have here?
So this was a wild one. This was a wild film, Tom. Man, I want to start this one with a little bit of an explanation of the world that the story exists in, because I would say little is done in the film to give this exposition, and definitely to its detriment. It is a touch confusing, not that it's the most complex story, but the world itself is just a little bit an odd pill to swallow. The Warriors are a gang, one of the toughest around, but lost among dozens of smaller gangs, all fighting for a slice of the street. The film opens up with all these gangs gathering for sort of unionization meeting of sorts that is rallied by one of the toughest gangs around. During this unification, the leader is shot, and it plunges a massive crowd into absolute chaos. Cops show up, and infighting starts, and this is what sparks the chaos of what this story is about. During the chaos, a rival gang leader of the Rogues, I think it is, casts blame on the Warriors as the assassins in this meeting of like 900 gang members. It's really an awesome scene.
We're in New York here in this movie,
yes,
right?
Yes,
Okay.
A kind of a bizarro reality New York, but definitely trying to be late 70s New York, especially in relation to its gang violence.
Okay.
You know, I mean, we go back to last week with West Side Story, where there was, with jazz ballet. There's no jazz ballet here, so this is your gang violence if you want it. But there are fantastical elements. The gangs are themed. They all have their own branding and style to it.
That's cool.
It oozes style.
Okay.
Very cool. But what's so phonetic, what's so amazing about this opening sequence, and why I want to give it this kind of proper due and really summarize it for folks at home, is what spawns from this, how this is a springboard for the story of this movie. It basically ensues a wild chase for the gang of the Warriors to get the hell out of the Bronx, with every gang, I mean, like, we're talking like 90 gangs all having their knives out on it. You know, they are really all looking to collect on a bounty that is eventually put on the Warriors. And what ensues is really the film is almost 100% chase sequence. It's very interesting.
In a good way?
In a very good way.
Oh, wow.
There is almost a quality that reminded me of The Revenant or something like that, that there is always forward motion. They're really never taking a step back, and they're certainly stumbling into hardship and road bumps and obstacles for them progressing and to get the hell out of the Bronx. But it is... there's an excitement to it. It's it's a wild chase, and almost has a thriller suspense type of vibe to it, because there is a hellish feel to the Bronx. One sequence is they're trying to get out on the subway, and guess what the gangs do? They throw Molotovs on the subway track. Like, they are not getting out of the Bronx.
That's so crazy.
It's really an interesting feel to a movie. I enjoyed it a lot for that reason. As far as this kind of like high octane premise, structurally, like I said, the Warriors are really in this chase sequence for the entire time. When they are not running like hell, they are living up to their name, and that is with fight sequences and brawl sequences. My praise is a little half and half here. The action sequences are wild. They are creative. But there are some rough edits here. There are some edits around, it's a late 70s movie, so you're going to have kind of like a Bruce Lee kung fu, Of course. Which I find is funny, every now and again, like, they're battling with like chains and whips and bats, and then someone just throws like a roundhouse kick out of nowhere. Right. It's very entertaining for that reason. But some of the edits here, I don't want to call amateurish. Our director does plenty plenty of other things.
Is it like lacking in fluidity though?
Yeah, the cuts are a little bit too hard. And listen, one of my favorite films is the original Alien, and there are some hard cuts in there that are, kind of show its 70s age to it. I think the reason why I bring this up as a criticism with Warriors is because it's an action film first, and if you are not clean on your editing and your cuts, that's big pass or fail for me.
No, yeah, I think naturally, again, just for viewing pleasure, if it's choppy like that, it's just not as good.
Yeah. Where I think it balances out, and if anything, pushes it a little bit into just plain the positive side of that. These action sequences are very creative. The sets are taken into account, the type of weapons and the type of struggle that gang versus gang violence has in this. It really makes use of the setting around them, which is great to see.
Yeah,
if we bring it up once an episode, but John Wick, there's a lot there that is taken into design, which I enjoyed a lot. So, but I would say I'm in love with this film because it is shown right in that initial sequence. There is a huge juggle to the production. We are talking near like 900 extras in that initial scene.
That's unreal.
It's great to see on screen, too. And these are not just like extras standing around, especially when the riot starts. They're running
involved
in like 7 different directions. It is truly chaotic on screen.
That's crazy. I mean, that's awesome. I mean, how did it... What did we watch in the 70s recently? Was it Soylent Green?
Yes, and similar scale to the extras.
Yeah, and you love that. It actually felt big. It felt, yeah.
And maybe there is a trend in films of the time that they say, well, we're not going to resort to, spotty special effects. We got people, we're going to use people, you know?
I wonder how much of it was almost like, so when one of the Transformers was filmed close to us.
Oh, that's right.
And they just grabbed anybody. Well, in fact, actually, technically, because there was like blowing up, they were supposed to be in an Asian country. It might have been China. So
really?
They were grabbing anyone who was Chinese. And it was like during explosions and stuff. So they just gave them massive bags of rice and just like act freaked out.
Wow.
So they were just pulling people off of the street. I wonder if that's because for 900 people.
Of course, the taste of Michael Bay is impeccable.
Right, of course. But I wonder for 900 people, was that it? It was just, you're in New York City and it's just like calling where it's just like, hey, anyone who's been this day, anybody show up.
Absolutely. And it was enough for me to really pay attention to the credits too, of saying like, how much are they really putting out there with this? The key thing is, I got to really give a lot of credit to how much and how physically demanding these extras are. When I say chase sequences, these dudes are just running, and they are running. Like, this is not like, they're a little bit slower, so the cameraman as well, hats off, because he is running backwards.
He's in a cart, I'm sure.
Yeah, true. But, I mean, very physically demanding, and a lot is there to appreciate because of just how chaotic of a scene it is. Again, in that initial sequence, not only do we get an introduction to our gangs, but the scale of what they're up against. Let's say we only saw maybe a handful of the top gangs.
It wouldn't feel...
It wouldn't feel like the Bronx is a living hell. It would not feel... the stakes would not be there for them to escape, because we as the audience know potentially they're going to be up against every single gang member that we saw in this opening sequence.
Right,
know?
Yeah. That's a good point, actually.
Yeah.
Because if there was just a few people, and it's going to come across like it was done in studio practically, you don't feel that. You don't feel that bigness or that vastness of the
exactly.
danger. Yeah.
And with us seeing just like how many, individual gang members could be potentially after them, and how many truly really show up, a who's who of what's introduced. You're like, oh, I remember seeing them, it's very interesting. Let's talk about the gangs themselves, because this is the most defining feature of the film. I'm not going to lie, I think this is where this movie is going to live or die for a lot of people. The gang design is all over the map. Some gangs are cool as ice. Our main gang that's leading this whole thing is called the Riffs, and they are like a Kung Fu Black Panthers. Very cool, like awesome design. Others are there for comedic purposes and almost ridiculously comedic, there is a gang called the Orphans that their defining feature is that they're not good fighters, but they, but there's like 30 of them. So, you know what I mean? It's like their numbers over, quantity over quality. And some of the gangs are even nightmarish in design. But honestly, where I say this might live and die for folks at home, not in a good way. It does not make sense. There is how do I even describe it? There is a mime baseball gang. They are not only are they themed around baseball, not only are they themed around being silent and mimes, they also have like sailor flags. It looks like mariner flags painted on their face. It is wild. I think they're called like the Furies or something like that.
Very cool.
I think the whole thing, to me,
ridiculous and fun and great.
Yeah, it's very comic book. It's very cartoonish. I would see as a criticism, unfortunately, where this film probably would rank a lot higher for me if the realism translated to the very real life violence within New York. Pre-Giuliani New York, we'd always, people talk about, how shitty New York really was in the late 70s and how much violence there was. If that translated into some realism, I think this movie would rank a little bit more higher for me, especially with a modern day watching. It just comes off extremely cartoonish. It feels like Gotham rather than New York. So much that this could very well be like the framework for Joker 2, where Joker was off a taxi driver. Like this is this could really be something that Hollywood could work with. But I would say it really is going to come down to it either works for you or not. I would say go in maybe a little bit more lighthearted with it, and it's an action film. You know what I mean? It's a chase action film. So maybe, take it a little bit more lighter-hearted, despite obviously being around an allegory for a very real topic of violence in New York. Quick note, the music is 100% in the continuity test, and much like our last film, is tied into a radio station that gives us a peek into gang society. I would say very cool secret society stuff, and this time works because the music is only there to mark the chapters of our gang's progression in getting out of the Bronx. It works so much better because, one, it's not in your face. Two, it's strategic to kind of bookmark the different chapters of where our gang is progressing. And more than anything, I mean, could have been heavy-handed. Joe Walsh is on the soundtrack. They're still pulling from actual content of the time that would be late 70s, but it's just not in your face and is used in the same interesting implementation that it's tied through an actual radio broadcast, which I appreciated a lot then.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty cool style.
Yeah, very cool. Very, very cool sequences. We never see actually the radio DJ or the disc jockey's actual face. She's always at like mouth height, which is just it really oozes style, especially her alliance to the riffs being this kind of kung fu Black Panther analogy in the gang. So has a lot of style for that reason. If I could give a direct comparison to how this film feels, though, in kind of a summary, this feels much like the first Mad Max or Boy and His Dog. It tries to play to a raunchier late 70s crowd.
Okay.
I think that's really defining these type of films after 75 that I think, the films that are being produced, or at least that stand out around that time, they're trying to get some shock and awe. They're trying to really have style over substance, and that's where I feel I come with a criticism in this. There is a lot of style, but there's not much room for substance and a deeper storytelling to it, even when it comes to character arcs. And again, like I said, if maybe some of that style was toned back, this film could really be a masterpiece because of what it glimpses into the violence of the time and the story it's trying to tell about New York at the time. I don't know. Does that make sense as far as what I'm saying around Mad Max and those type of mid to late 70s movies?
I think actually that's a great comparison. Because they just have that, when you watch them, they have a feel, they have a vibe, they have a way about them.
It's trying to shock you.
Yes, exactly. It's like there's a reason why we're rated R. You know what I mean? It gets you a little bit. And I think that makes... I can definitely see this movie doing that.
Yeah.
Same thing. Which, that's what it's going for.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think I think it would be much stronger if it tried to maybe balance that out, just because so much time is put into, I don't know, looking at mime baseball player gangs on screen, and you know, every gang has a theme and every gang has colors, and
Which is cool.
it is cool. You know, there's definitely a world building that this film does to the fictional gangs of New York, but it's I don't know, it's half and half for me, because I think it could be just so much more if just toned back a tiny bit, and specifically the weirdness and the shock awe it's going for. I mean, I think for this film illustrating how much of a nightmare it could be to get out of the Bronx, and you know, it really representing more of a thriller action movie than just a straight action movie. I think this is a pretty interesting watch in present day. Its energy and the premise that it captures, I think this is why I'm walking away with a very positive recommendation. We're going to go ahead and give The Warriors a 71.
All right, 71. Very good. Especially because when a movie's made like that, trying to be that genre, and it's in that Boy and a Dog and that Mad Max and everything like that, sometimes there's just a very low budgetness or low budget quality to it as well. But that's good that it holds up this much. And that for a 79 movie doing what it is, and it's a 71, that's awesome. It sounds like a good time.
It is. It is a really good time. I didn't want to use the word boys watch too much.
Right.
That may be my favorite thing, go-to criticism or go-to recommendation, but it really is there in some capacity. Just a good action film, bottom line. So.
All right, awesome. That's The Warriors at 71%. We're going to jump a number of years here. We're in 2021. This came out just last year. Definitely a different movie as well. But this is Lamb, which I had never heard of. I never heard of the director either, who is Voldemort Johansson. What is Lamb, and how was it?
So Lamb is an odd one. It is very difficult to talk about this film with no spoilers. Lamb is an A24 joint with my girl Noomi Rapace. Hopefully we will be covering in a special to come. And is a challenging film to talk about with no spoilers. I'm going to have to dance around this one pretty significantly. I think the best way to navigate this is talk about the genre, which is pretty unique. I would call this film a fantasy drama. Lamb follows a couple that lives in very rural Iceland on a farm they operate. There is a sadness and a melancholy to their relationship, presumably because of a lost child that happens off screen and before the story, though it's really never fully explained. And yeah, that's really, I don't want to say
Can't go much further.
Yeah. Unfortunately, because I mean, much like a lot of delicate spoiler talks, this film is nowhere on the scale or my appreciation of Mass, but it's one of those things that can be summarized extremely easily, but you know, is straightforward. It's all about the little bit that you unpack this, the little bit that there is to this movie. This movie is very slow, very quiet, and very little dialogue. What dialogue is there is in full Icelandic. I mean, it's
viewer be warned.
Yeah, viewer be warned. Yeah, I mean, as far as subtitles go, there's not a lot of subtitles because there's not a lot of talking to begin with, but it is definitely a very deep Icelandic movie. We follow the daily routine on the farm without any happiness until a mysterious events happens to our couple, and suddenly their lives are brighter and happier, and it does focus on it. This film is very minimalistic in its storytelling, though. A lot is left to the keen eye and the viewer paying attention. Actually, much like Power of the Dog, a lot is left to landscape shots to try to be an allegory or a visual storytelling to the mood of our characters and that melancholy.
Okay, I was going to say, just that carry through the melancholy feel.
Exactly. Instead of our characters acting that, it is depicted in the landscape shots and the establishing setting shots.
Music as well? Is it like just sad, constant music through the background,
I
or no?
Notice the music too.
Oh, well, okay. Well,
yeah. Yeah, come to think of it, I didn't even know.
You know, sometimes there's just those droning, oftentimes just like violin type, slow.
This film is almost inaccurately described as a horror, and I think that maybe because of the music, it's not a horror. I don't.
Oh, okay,
think.
that's good to know.
Yeah, like I said, fantasy drama is as weird as that sounds as a combination. It really is what it is. So, but the film eventually does get some energy as. After this fantastical event, you know, there is happiness and romance in the relationship. And we see this focus less on their daily routine in the farm and just living life. I did like this movie, but this film's minimalism hurts it a tad. It's almost playing very much into that stereotype that A24, they are just slow movies. And this was definitely a slow movie. So I like slow movies. But
it need to be worth it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It need to be worth it, and there are aspects worth it here, but I think it pushed that boundary where I think as of late, A24 I think has been making snappier films or more engaging films. But something to note for folks at home: if you are bored to tears by things, then this is not for you. So, the criticism for me is that the film does little beyond creating the mystery around the couple. I wouldn't call it one note, but there's nothing else this film tries to tackle. There's nothing else to the juggling act. And that's why it's maybe even so hard to talk about without a single spoiler, because there's nothing else to spoil, you know, once you talk about the subject matter of the film.
Did the simplicity of it and just the story itself, did it still have you on the edge of your seat a little bit? Did it still keep you engaged at all, or were there times that you were kind of like dipping off and just kind of losing interest, or was it, you know, again, simplicity could be fine.
Yeah. I mean, the mystery is there. You're definitely engaged in the sense of what the hell is going on in this film. But yeah, no, I think that's a good way to describe it. You know, I mean, I think boring, as shallow as a criticism as it may be, I still think it points into maybe a little bit of a drop ball of create engagement with your audience. You know,
especially if you're going to pick I'm assuming a smaller cast.
Yes, 3 people.
Okay, so if you've got a small cast, simple story, you're making a movie. You want to keep your viewers engaged through storytelling or cinematography or whatever. You know, and it seems like it kind of dropped the ball a little bit.
Yeah. Or at least plays into that stereotype of A24 films. You know what I mean?
Right. Which we're big fans of.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
We are. But not all the time. You know,
right.
I think there's some hit and miss quality to it. So some positives. I like the dream sequences in this. Very tastefully surreal. Also have heard, like I said, some call this horror. I think that misunderstands the fantasy qualities to this. The many landscape shots that are in this film, there is an interesting feel with Iceland's many hours of daylight, which kind of creates a surrealism in itself. Just a background note, but definitely catches the eye. And ultimately, though, my critiques, when it goes to the negative sides of this, my critiques of why I feel meh on this story a little bit, I have to push it to the back burner. The mystery that unfolds is the most enjoyable part. And if, you know, I mean, again, it can be summarized in a sentence, but I can't do it to rob someone of unfolding that mystery for themselves. I think for folks at home that have seen it, and you're maybe wondering what I'm referring to of why this comes out a little bit more lukewarm for me, is that my issues lie with a little bit of logic of characters and character actions, especially later on. But I don't want to say much more than beyond that, because there is enjoyment in this film, and that enjoyment lies in the shock and the mystery of this fantasy drama.
Right.
We're going to go ahead and give Lamb a 60 on the dot.
Okay, yeah. So a little lackluster, but still, you know, an okay film.
And I think important for how much I referenced A24, definitely an above average A24 as well experience. You know, this is...
Really? What would you think would be lower?
Ooh, I'm going to get flack. I'm going to get flack from folks at home.
Well, how about this? Maybe I'll save you here. A Ghost Story.
Yeah, oh, sure. And I'll get flack for that, but I stand by it.
I think A Ghost Story was higher than 60, though.
No, Ghost Story was like in the 30s.
It was?
Yeah. Forgot about that one.
Do we want to say
I certainly didn't forget about the entire sequence. Someone ate a pie in that movie.
Yeah, you were upset about the pie sequence.
Yeah, and hey, that's a perfect example of maybe wasting the audience's time. You know what I mean? Maybe that's slow for slow's sake is not a style.
Yeah, Lamb is an hour and 46. Definitely could maybe cut some time off. By the way, it's good to say all the movies today, below 2 hours.
Whoa.
Kind of cool. Especially our next one. Our next one's very, very short.
Which I was happy for.
But okay, so A24, it's a 60% for Lamb, which again, I actually didn't hear of. I haven't really heard of it.
This actually
It's
came
like
out
way off my radar.
in October when we were doing spooky films. Unfortunately, though, I myself was kind of spoiled on some of the premise here, and I wanted to give it time. I wanted
that's cool. That's cool.
Wanted to give it its just due,
Oh, very good. Okay. All right, so that's Lamb with a 60%. Those were our 3 previously released films. We have our new releases, our in theaters now films. But before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and go into our producer segment. 0 producers this week, but we're still new, and our site was down for a little while too. Our donation site was down. And if you're a little confused of what this is when we take time to thank those of you who help produce this podcast. Vin and I host the show. We take care of things like the site and everything like that, but you all help produce the show. You help produce the website. And how you do that is you can go to thedailyratings.com and you can go to the donations tab and give any type of monetary support that you feel is necessary. It's the value for value model. Are you getting value from the podcast and listening to it? Are you going to the site and checking out some movies? Then if you could, what value did you get? Put a number to it, and then you could give that to us, a one-time donation, a monthly, a weekly, and we have some fun set donations that you can go ahead and choose as well. Or, like I said, it's whatever you want it to be. And we understand that this is just, the podcast comes out once a week. We're a movie podcast. How big is it in your life? How really important is this to you? And we get that. And if you don't want to donate, could you, but you enjoy it, tell somebody about it. Tell a few people,
Absolutely.
Tell your friends, your brother, your sisters, your cousins about it if you want. Just pass on the message a little bit. It's so, we're just starting this and getting our feet wet, and any little help helps, basically.
Absolutely. If this saved you some time, if this had a utility in your life, then absolutely.
Yeah,
spread
and
the word.
if it's not that important to you to donate, or we get it. It's hard to donate sometimes, and you just don't have the funds to give a little extra. It would be great if you could just pass our name on a little bit more, or stop by Apple and give us 5-star ratings or something like that. All that little bit helps us start. We're growing. We're trying to really make this into something special. And just take some time, and it takes some money as well. So we appreciate all of you who help produce and are going to produce this podcast and the website. We thank you so much. Again, it's dailyratings.com and the donations tab. Now, with that, Finn, we're going to keep on going. Like I said, this is our new release now, our now in theaters, and we're going to go ahead with the very short film. It's an hour and 23 minutes only. But this is Umma. It's a horror that we have here.
Yes, brand new horror film out. First-time director Iris Shim. She is also backed by Sam Raimi himself as a producer, which was why this landed on my radar. Umma stars Sandra Oh from Grey's Anatomy fame, and also in what we will talk about in just a moment for Turning Red. She plays the mother in Turning Red. So a little bit of a tie of these two films together. Actually, unintentionally, I found that in research.
It's kind of cool when that works out.
Yeah, it was a good coincidence. It is half supernatural, half psychological, Korean-styled horror. That's a mouthful, but Umma is around a mother, played by Sandra, haunted equally by past trauma, but also the inevitability that we all face to one day become our parents. Bum, bum, bum. It really does take a interesting theme of familial pressure and complements the very strict discipline found in Korean culture, or in specifically the Korean culture of our characters. The pressures of what expectations of life, expectations of what her family wants from her, that is tied into a little bit of that psychological aspect of where this horror lies. A highlight for me as well is actually the lack of tech and electricity. This is tied into the trauma for Sandra's character, leaving her a little bit mentally strange, which I am always a big fan of in horror films. I do not want a main character that is flawless or perfectly good. I don't want, them just being fodder for the horror happening to them. I want them to be a little bit of the horror itself.
Yeah, add to it. Absolutely.
The unease, absolutely. And strategically for horror, I was really happy to see this, a film define itself in this way, as tension was able to be built up quickly with no phone, full darkness at night. They are literally using lanterns, even though it is in present day. So
Interesting.
There's a lot done to explain, obviously, the scriptwriter, I believe, which was Shim as well. I could be wrong.
Yep, that's correct.
Yes. So, a lot was done there to maybe translate, this is a certain style and certain strategic things in the filmmaking that wanted to be done. And that has actually in-script explanations, which I want to definitely give some brownie points for. I really enjoy how the horror sequences are shot here as well. A lot of overlap in audio. Edits key the viewer into these themes of familial pressure. Honestly, the best praise I can give it, or rather give Shim as a director, is the visual storytelling she crafts in the film. There is a lot of really interesting horror of how it's built up, or rather, I should say, really interesting suspense of how the horror is built up in this film. And I think there's a lot of style. I think I will pay attention to this director. However, I think this is where my praise drops off as... Well, I mean, we just verified now she wrote the film, and the script is just not there for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's lacking exactly?
Delivery is just not great.
Is it the writing or the acting?
I think it's the writing. I think it's the writing. Because Sandra brings a lot of emotion to her performance, but the writing is just there. It's very exposition heavy. There's the delivery maybe isn't the best part, but it's a combo of weak performances. It's just very basic storytelling in the writing itself. Characters speak in big blocks with no volley, with no back and forth. It doesn't feel dynamic.
Yeah, that comes out very easily in film, and it's not good.
And you can definitely tell. I mean, as far as the monologues or the big blocks of text that characters speak in, there's care. There's a reason why in the script there's importance put into that, because they're really trying to deliver why the punch of the horror means something to our characters. What the thematic tie-in. But it just feels very basic. I think it's a unfortunately a mismatch for how good the visual storytelling is in this film. I would say if acting is to blame, Sandra Oh is like I said, I don't think she's bad. There's emotion in it, but maybe it's a 50-50 on delivery, and I just feel the exposition heaviness of it, especially when we finally get into the explanation of what some of the horror elements are. It just feels, unfortunately, it feels amateurish. I would say it's a shame, because for a lot of directors, to make a movie is to write the movie. It was either a interview I saw with Scorsese himself, or maybe it was Werner Herzog. But directors know that if they want control over the film, if the film is going to be their baby, they're going to have to write it first and foremost. I think that's a lesson that Tarantino knows very well. I think it's a lesson that Christopher Nolan knows very well. That if you're going to make unique things, you need to be in the inception moment of what it is, even though if there is studio meddling in the meantime.
Right.
There has to be a follow through on it, but I feel some delegation or some pairing with a creative partner would have gone a long way for Shim as a director.
And what you're really saying is just to bounce those ideas off somebody.
Yeah, bounce it. I'm sure, especially with Sam Raimi as a producer, there was maybe there was there was some quality control there. But I'm telling you, Shim has a definitive visual style to what she does. Unfortunately, it is not there in the script of it itself. Yeah, and I usually don't focus on shoulda, coulda, wouldas. I don't see much value in that, but I just think it could have been better. And then definitely for the sophomore attempt of Shim as a director, hopefully there could be some more pairing, because again, she has a very definitive style to what she's doing.
And good,
so, yeah, and good, absolutely. I like the horror style here, but again, it's half praise. I don't think this film is too scary. That's a horror film. I mean, damn is right.
You kind of had this issue with a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I know.
Cursed was the same thing recently. This, we just had Lamb. It is billed as a horror as well.
No, that's such a misguided. Yeah, that's A24 just leaning into their normal marketing.
Right.
A24 does a bunch of horror. There are very cool concepts. I am a fan of Asian horror as well, of how how foreboding it can be, especially supernaturally. But there's just nothing visceral. There's nothing shocking here. This is a pretty big knock for me because I would say this horror film has one job, and that is to be scary. I was certainly happy to see no jump scares in this, but overall, maybe it could have used it. So I was, kind of questioning my usual marks because this doesn't have a single jump scare, and I was like, oh, maybe I was spoiled by the jump scare.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
How's the again? It's an hour and 23 minutes. Pacing good, bad?
I would say
what's
the
deal?
pacing is shot in the foot by this exposition heavy dialogue. You know what I mean? I'll give you an example. Sandra Oh is approached by a business partner. They run a bee farm, and he gives her like an opening line, and she talks for like 5 minutes straight about her backstory, and like this blue collar guy is just sitting there. And he's just like. It feels like I didn't ask about this. Why are you unloading on me? So the pacing, yes, it's short, but it's also long-winded for that reason.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, I can't stress enough.
So the movie's still too long.
Unfortunately,
my gosh,
very unfortunately.
Wow, that's a shame.
Yeah, but overall, weak stakes, weak hook, and unfortunately, as a result, a weak horror. And I was. There's a lot of thought put into the theming of the horror, a lot of care put into the visual design, but it's missing arguably the backbone to that, which is going to be the script, which is going to be, what's there. Specifically, where supernatural and psychological meet, there is a lot to love there. I think a lot of care is put into the message of this film and what it means for our characters, but nothing to, raise it above a very mundane experience. We're going to go ahead and give Umma a 56.
56, okay. And that's a shame because it sounds like there totally were nuggets there, and it just wasn't executed in other areas. Which, hey, 56 is what that is then.
Yeah, I think maybe this is a little bit more above average. If folks at home, you are a fan of Asian horror or kind of a deep supernatural horror, fall short in a lot of capacities, unfortunately.
Okay, 56, still not below the 50s though. It succeeded in at least it
treads water.
Some things. Oh, there you go. That's a good way to put it. Okay, I'm very interested about this next movie here.
Yes.
For multiple reasons, but this is Pixar's big movie. They released it. It's out on Disney Plus, but it's also in theaters. And this is Turning Red.
Yes.
And how
this
is
is
Pixar's...
out in theaters? I thought this was straight to Disney Plus, if I'm correct.
Okay, so I thought I was confused at this. Thought I had the answer. I'm back to being confused about this because I was asking myself. I was like, "Is this Pixar's big release? Is it? And then I was like, "It sure seemed like it."
It is definitely mainline Pixar, but I was. My first note is that straight to Disney Plus. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. For mainline Pixar, I think it's tough jumping into this at this point, as honestly, the graphical fidelity of what's on screen with Pixar is always being outdone. I think a perfect example of this, you watch the first Toy Story, some sequences are nightmarish, and not for their tone, they're nightmarish because of how bad the graphics look on the CGI, on the animation original Toy Story. I mean, it's got some rough looks to it, The story, thankfully, is there to raise it above, but it's hard to talk about Pixar, I feel, because they are always, as far as an industry of animation with Disney behind them, Disney bucks behind them, they're really always pushing the boundaries so much. So I think that's where a little bit of jumping into Pixar as a topic, almost like our Batman episode, intimidating for me to jump knee deep into for the podcast folks. Oscar-winning Domi Shi is now getting her feature-length film. Bao was her great short that kind of rocketed her into stardom or a lot of critical praise. Turning Red is about Mei Ling, a 13-year-old girl raised in a very traditionalist Chinese household. They run a family temple in Toronto. This temple so happens to be holding a curse that runs in the women of the family, turning them into a big red fox under stressful situations. It's an interesting premise.
Did you get a fox out of it?
But yeah, it was
It
like
was a red panda.
oh, I guess it.
Or is it a red panda? Because it got a long tail, right?
Yeah, I guess it could be a red. Oh yeah,
Why is this throwing us for so many loops? It was digital release. It's digital release, by the way.
Digital only. Okay, that's what I thought. It may have had like a soft launch. A lot of these digital releases, especially for I think like Academy consideration, they still need to be technically in like a limited release of theaters.
Yeah, I'm sure it's in limited. Yeah.
So, but I think unfortunately, it was a note for me because it's like this is mainline Pixar. This is an Oscar-winning director that is in their house. Why is this straight to Disney Plus? I don't know.
It doesn't make. It's Pixar's big.
Yeah.
I think it's Red Panda, by the way.
It is Red Panda. Okay.
Well, it shows how much we liked it.
I think I did like this film. I mean, I would say I do like Turning Red. Didn't at first. I'm happy to say this is, its name. I was kind of interested in why it was called Turning Red, and my mind was racing. I'm happy to say this is neither Chinese propaganda nor Pixar's first film about menstruation. So I'm really happy I do not have to talk about that. This movie actually jokes about that a little bit. The menstruation, not the propaganda, of course. But jokes aside, Turning Red is embarrassment. It is anger. It is pubescent feelings. I think the writing here has a lot of breathing room. This script, has a gambit of emotions to play with that a 13-year-old girl can go through. And it's large. It's diverse. Part of that array is her friend group and their ride or die attitude. I think this film may not have the biggest stakes or the biggest arc in the world, but it tells a story of how special a group of friends can be. And I can kind of get behind that. I mean, it's definitely not Up or even more recently Soul, where there was a grandiose kind of topic that they were trying to tackle through a children's story. This is really much more straightforward, but I think it tells an effective story of that group of friends and that ride or die attitude. And I will take that any day in Pixar's offerings because it's executed upon very well, but it's also not like another entry in Cars or something like that. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah, it's new, it's fresh.
Exactly. And maybe that's a bad example because we're ways away from the rehash era of Pixar's where they were just adding to their existing series.
Right.
We've thankfully climbed out of that.
Because we're gonna get this new batch of films, and then it'll be 1 and 2, and Turning Redder and
Turning Blush. She's getting better with it. Yeah, I would say I will really take that any day over maybe a film even trying to handle something more significant or more of a significant arc for our characters and failing at it because it comes off too preachy or anything like that. This movie is about Mei Ling having a group of friends, and among this gambit of emotions, her friends help her navigate that. And they're trying to get to a boy band concert. Like that's that's the goal of these characters, but it's also like I don't think there's a problem in telling a simpler story with this, and I certainly was along for the ride because I really do think it is a pretty gorgeous film. 80s nostalgia is done. We are now officially in 90s and early 2000s nostalgia. Mei Ling and friends are obsessed with boy bands, and the edits of the film have very 90s animation. I mean, there are some shots right out of Sailor Moon and animes of the time. Cuts have a lot of anime influence in general. But most impressive is the incorporation of 90s themes and motifs into the soundtrack and score. I was really impressed here. We see digital drums, or rather we hear digital drums, effects and fills swiped right out of the pop music of the time, and it is mixed in with this more traditional Asian arrangement to the backbone of the score. It is awesome. I was a big fan of the score and soundtrack here. Very impressed with the follow-through on design, and shout out to the main composer, Ludwig Göransson, I think. Another Icelandic name, probably. Another Nordic name. They're shooting us in the foot this week, folks. But yeah, I think a very solid effort from Pixar's tireless animators. I got to be honest, folks. I have a soft spot for animation because, you know, I mean, you hear nightmare stories of how demanding these roles in Hollywood are, and to see a film that may be very tied at the leash to its 90s love letter, very tied at the leash to a simple plot, and may not have the depth that we see that Pixar usually tries to tackle. At the same time, it is vastly above imitators and peers of animated films coming out at the time. We didn't cover it on the podcast, but Raya and the Last Dragon, you can see how even within Disney's shop, it's trying to do what Pixar does and fails miserably at it. It is amazing to see that with Turning Red, or I would say more so surprising to see that Turning Red still has just as much heart and just as much visual entertainment on screen as the deeper stories they tried to tell, but and still succeeds to a degree at that. I'll be honest, I still prefer Soul to this. I would say even jumping back a little bit to Incredibles 2. I think those films do stand above this, but I would say this is still a very solid watch. We're going to go ahead and give Turning Red a 73.
73, pretty good score. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's fair. I think that's right there, because what that says to me, just looking at that score, is, yeah, this is a pretty good Pixar movie, but, you know, there's some more cream of the crop. Yeah. And
also, I feel like this film has been getting a lot of unfair criticism online. I really try to avoid hearing buzz, especially to not taint my reviews at all for folks at home. You know, I mean, we just talked about Lamb, where I had it on the back burner because I felt it was tainted.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the criticism towards this is just ridiculous. Apparently, there's one reviewer that says he couldn't relate to the characters at all. Yeah, they're little girls. Like, you know what I mean? The film could kind of be an allegory for menstruation and, you know what I mean, like, coming-of-age stuff. It's like, well, you know, yeah, maybe. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's not the right way to see it. And that's where I encourage. This story is about friendship and the group of friends, and what that can do for coming of age, to lean on those people rather than family.
All right, that's I have a Tommy Two Shoes.
That was you did not lead. You did not lead in at all on this. He just came out.
Here's the thing. So the whole thing with the Tommy Two Shoes is, when movies I really care about, it's not just every movie I see I'm going to go give Tommy Two Shoes. I don't care about my score. You know what I mean? This isn't I'm not watching these movies every week.
You do care about your score. I wouldn't say.
Right. But I mean, as far as like any old movie I watch, like that, this one threw me into a Tommy Two Shoes score.
He's not happy. He's not happy. This is blindsiding me, I'll be honest.
Yeah, here we go. Here it comes. Maybe I wrote some of those reviews that you were reading online then. I did not like. I liked the animation of this film.
Okay,
I thought the red panda was pretty adorable.
Oh, okay.
And overall, I thought the animation was good. Mm-hmm. I didn't know whether to really like this movie or shun this movie from the entire world as much as I possibly could. Overall, here's my take.
Okay,
I'll start with I'll go off of kind of ping pong of what you were saying.
Sure, yeah,
and your thoughts on it. I think the friendship plot, I think the whole idea and the through line of the friendship, I think it's there. I think it takes a back seat really to the main thing going on, which is relationship between mother and child. Mother and daughter, I think, really takes the forefront.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
You're exhausted.
I had the same thing. Well, it's just like, how far do I go into this? Try to make it as quick as possible. I was turning red, and I'm just like, okay, what? Okay, here comes, of course, Pixar. Here we go. China's taking. Obviously, I'm just like, what is the propaganda here?
And which is why I made a joke about
it. Right. Obviously,
thankfully, it's not that, you know.
Right, but and yet I still think there might be some. The fact that it's in Canada and it's so Canadian, this movie, there will never, ever, ever be a Pixar movie, especially I would say anytime soon, where you would see that many American flags and that much country represented in the film. There are Canadian flags everywhere in this film.
Okay.
And there's just something weird about it. There's something weird with
it doesn't smell right to you.
The Chinese and Canadian through lines. It's just, I was like, why is it so much? I was shocked. I was like, this would never be happening if it was in this country.
Interesting.
If they set the story in this country. The menstruation, the getting your first period, essentially.
It's a joke in the film, certainly. It's a joke in the title.
Yes and no. That's the thing. It's like they include it in the title. Like, it's just when you watch it, it's just like, what is going on here? They make such, and I think about the audience. That's what when I was watching that, I was like, this is messed up. Pixar talking about just like getting your period and menstruation. What is this? This is for a very small audience. When we, the best part about Pixar movies is young, very old. The movies hit for anyone watching for multiple levels. This is so female and young female coming of age centric that it's a little strange for Pixar to be focusing on it too much. It's weird of how much they get involved into it, and at the same time there's so much fear and worry and scaredness. I guess, did I say fear already? And fear going into when like we're dealing with like that whole coming of age menstruation, getting your period thing, where it's like I'm watching this and being like, this movie is prime for I would say 6-year-old girls to 15-year-old girls and everything like that. And I can't help but notice it's like it would be really terrifying being a little girl knowing that this will be happening to me one day and how horrible it's going to be.
Well, don't you think that's the lens we should be examining that through allegory?
No, I think it should be more so this happens to everyone. Well, if you're a girl,
you're right,
this happens to all girls. Everything is okay. And this is something everyone goes to, and you're not alone in any of this.
Right.
I got the complete opposite. It just seemed like it was giving a really poor message to that. Same thing with the mother-daughter in a relationship thing. I think it really was like normalizing, like, obviously you're going to have horrible times with your mother, and at times you're going to hate each other, and that's just what happens. I don't think that's cool. I don't think the normalization of huge strife between, being young, like at a young age, and normalizing that strife between you and the adults and your parents, or even further, your aunts and grandparents. Again, there was a normalization there, which I didn't love. I really didn't quite like that. The dad was an idiot.
Oh, the dad.
And it was like insulting.
The dad was, yeah.
So overall, that's what I took from it. I found it, and I hate to be that. I'm not a prude or anything like that. I can be open-minded toward this, but it being a Pixar movie, me sitting down watching this, I found the whole thing leaving a really bad taste in my mouth.
Interesting.
And not really being appropriate in a lot of different ways, and leaving thoughts or images or ideas in this young audience, because it is a Pixar movie, leaving maybe them with maybe not the best mindset, or going forward and thinking about things in more negative light than really Pixar. You should be thinking about things more positively at the end of it.
Interesting. I definitely respect what you're saying there, because I do agree there is more of a dread to these topics within the film than an optimism.
Yeah, and some of it, exactly. And I think overall, that was my overarching feeling of it. I did like the friendship aspect was great.
Yeah.
And what it is to have friends, and what you should look for in the friends that you surround yourself with.
Absolutely.
Definitely good notes. But I do think that for me watching it didn't take the forefront. I thought that did take I thought that was second story to main story being the more the parental kids growing up with parents.
Yeah, and certainly the dynamic with the mother, like you said.
Right. Not disagreeing with your take at all. It's just that's how you watched it.
Sure,
that's how I took it.
sure.
But yeah, I think definitely coming at this more critical. Definitely critical, and almost looking down on a little bit more probably than you.
And maybe Disney saw the same thing. I mean, that right there, that type of perspective makes sense a lot more with why this would be a digital release versus a theatrical release.
Right. Still, that's strange.
Yeah.
We should almost get into that. Because my thing is, it was billed as a big Pixar movie.
Yes.
It wasn't billed as like
this is main team, over at Pixar.
Right, exactly, right. So very strange. But anyway, so that was my take on it. But I think your 73 is pretty accurate, and I think that's how maybe a lot of people would feel. And I'm looking at it. Maybe I was just salty right away, trying to look at the Chinese propaganda, and I should have just sat down and watched a Pixar movie.
I would insert if only for a children's film, maybe tone it back a little bit, but at the same time, I think your viewpoint is valid. You know what I mean? I think your experience with it clearly is resonating with, some population of viewers with this because the reception of this has been a little bit all over the map on this film.
It has been. And that's just how are you going to go into it thinking and watching it and enjoying or not enjoying it. Anyway, that's enough of me and my one shoe with laces untied.
One shoe with laces untied. No, listen, don't take it back. If that's what you're feeling, man.
See, that's what, with my ratings, I can't take them back.
Fair, consistent, honest.
Hey. Tommy Two Shoes.
Tommy.
It's very fluid, these scores. No. No. But yeah, no, I think I'm going to go one shoe, laces untied.
I'm glad you spoke up too, because I think again, it's real criticism that the film is getting, and to represent both sides of that, I think that's exactly why I want to hear from you. Almost, in the same way that when we talked all the way back at No Time to Die, you were in the true fan population of that.
I think we were a lot of agreement on. We agreed mostly on that as well.
Absolutely.
And this, no, I actually going into it, and like folks at home, I literally have no idea what Vin's going to rate this before we sit down and we're doing.
Folks at home, I did not know there was a time. I mean, if I was a betting man,
son of a bitch over here. But it's funny. I thought maybe you were going to give it in the 50s or something like that, and then hearing your take on it, I totally loved it.
Yeah. And listen, that soundtrack, I can't stress enough. It is cool as ice. The fact that we have like in sync type of drum fills in a Chinese orchestration, I mean, I thought was very cool.
No, absolutely,
very cool
100%.
follow through on design. So.
All right, very good, Vin. Okay, is there anything else you'd like to add, or are we going to roll credits here?
No, I think that's it. I'm happy to be off the shackles of watching Oscar Best Picture nods. I mean, I enjoyed a lot there, but I'm really excited to dive in. Also, was able to wrap the Lucas project. I mean, 2 films and we're in and out. So excited
how about that?
I mean, that was nice, But excited to jump into what I a little bit normally do with my watches, and I think we may touch on some exciting stuff in the coming weeks. So
I can't wait. And next week, don't forget, maybe we'll get. It'd be great. We can share really crapping on the Oscars.
The results.
Yeah.
Folks, this is technically recorded before the 27th, so we will have the results to lament over.
But Vin, awesome. Thank you for watching those movies for us, doing the homework, and thanks for stopping by. Folks at home, we're going to run this down just one more time here. We have American Graffiti with the 53%, The Warriors with the 71%, Lamb with the 60%. We have newly released Umma with the 56%, and Turning Red with the 73%. We thank you so much for listening, folks, and we'll see you next week on the Daily Ratings Podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, if you would, give us a good rating or tell a friend about us. If you're wondering if a film is worth a watch, or if you'd just like to see more movie ratings from Vince, be sure to stop by thedailyratings.com, where we have our ever-expanding catalog of films. Also, if you found value in the podcast or our site, become a producer and go to the donations tab on thedailyratings.com. You can donate whatever amount of value you feel you received from us. You'll get a producer mention on the next podcast episode, too. We're looking to build this into something large and great, but also be independent from those corporate sponsors. So we greatly appreciate any support from you all. So thanks so much, and we'll see you next time on the Daily Ratings Podcast.